Picture this. You're not at the gym. You're not dripping sweat on a treadmill. You're just walking. Maybe to your car. Maybe down a hallway. Maybe around the block after dinner. Nothing heroic. Nothing intense. Just movement. And yet, deep inside your chest, something remarkable is quietly happening. Your heart is adjusting. Your blood vessels are responding. Your entire cardiovascular system is recalibrating itself, not because you forced it, but because you simply moved. That's the story most people have never been told. Not the version about burning calories or hitting 10,000 steps. The real story. The biological one. What walking actually does to your heart, minute by minute, day by day, year by year, and why cardiologists consider it one of the most underestimated tools in cardiovascular medicine. Let's start where the real problem lives, and it's probably not where you think. Most people, when they worry about heart health, imagine the heart itself failing, a muscle giving out, and arteries suddenly blocked. And while those outcomes are real, they rarely begin with the heart. In most cases, the heart is the last thing to break. What breaks first is the environment the heart is forced to operate inside, the vascular system, the vast network of arteries, veins, and capillaries that carry blood throughout the entire body. Think about an old house with aging pipes. The water pump in the basement might be perfectly built, strong, and fully intact, but if the pipes gradually stiffen, narrow, lose their elasticity, what happens? The pump has to work harder. It has to generate more pressure just to push the same amount of water through the same system. Over years, that extra strain accumulates. The pump doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because the system wore it down. Your cardiovascular system follows the exact same logic. When the body remains sedentary for long stretches, not occasionally, but as a daily default, blood vessels are no longer regularly challenged. They slowly lose their natural ability to expand and contract. The inner walls become stiffer, less responsive, less willing to cooperate with the blood flowing through them. And the heart? It quietly compensates by pushing harder. Not because anything is wrong with the heart itself, but because the pathway has become resistant. This is precisely where walking enters the picture. Not as a calorie-burning activity, not as a fitness checkbox, but as a system-level recalibration signal. A message delivered directly to the blood vessels, telling them to stay flexible, stay responsive, stay alive. When you walk, even at a comfortable, unhurried pace, blood flow through your vessels increases in a steady, controlled rhythm. It isn't explosive. It isn't shocking to the system. It's more like running clean water through old pipes on a consistent basis, preventing stagnation, preventing buildup, preserving the integrity of the entire network. The inner lining of your blood vessels, a thin but extraordinarily active layer called the endothelium, senses this increase in flow. When stimulated regularly by that gentle movement of blood, it releases biological signals, most notably nitric oxide, that encourage the vessel walls to relax, widen, and work with the blood rather than against it. The result is something quietly profound. Overall vascular resistance drops. The heart no longer has to fight the same invisible pressure it was fighting before. Each beat becomes more efficient, less strained. Over time, this mechanism is precisely why consistent walkers show more stable blood pressure, lower resting heart rates, and significantly reduced long-term cardiovascular risk. Not because walking forces the heart to become stronger through stress, but because walking reduces the resistance the heart has been silently battling every single day. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because these changes don't take months to begin. They start the moment you stand up and move.
In the first few minutes of a walk, large muscles in your legs begin requesting slightly more oxygen. It's a gentle request, not an alarm. The cardiovascular system responds immediately. The heart beats a little faster, a little more strongly, like an engine smoothly increasing its output as a car begins to roll. At the same time, blood flow becomes rhythmic and purposeful. The endothelium detects this shift and begins activating those same relaxation signals, allowing vessels to gently accommodate the increased flow without strain. As the walk continues, the body moves beyond simple reaction into something deeper, redistribution. Blood vessels become more cooperative. The same volume of blood begins moving with less mechanical resistance than before. Breathing naturally deepens and slows to match the body's chosen pace. And here's something people rarely appreciate. That breathing shift carries a powerful downstream effect on the nervous system. Rather than holding itself in a state of low-grade alertness, the default mode for many modern bodies, the nervous system begins to lean toward stability, toward regulation, toward calm. This is why so many people describe walking as mentally clearing. It isn't that problems disappear. It's that the body stops interpreting mild physical effort as a threat. The entire system exhales.
With sustained, repeated walking across days and weeks, something even more significant unfolds. The heart stops merely reacting beat by beat and begins learning efficiency. Each contraction gradually moves more blood per beat, which means the heart can afford to beat less frequently at rest. This lowering of resting heart rate, something cardiologists look for as a sign of a well-adapted cardiovascular system, isn't dramatic. It accumulates quietly, like compound interest, imperceptible day to day but unmistakable over months. Meanwhile, the blood vessels themselves are being trained. Daily cycles of gentle expansion and relaxation are doing for your arteries what regular stretching does for tight muscles, preserving their pliability, their ability to respond smoothly to demand rather than resisting it with rigidity. And critically, this entire process does not require long walks, difficult terrain, or significant physical effort. It requires consistency, repeated signals, a steady, reliable message sent to the system day after day. This body moves. This system needs to stay flexible, remain adaptable.
That understanding dismantles one of the most stubborn myths in cardiovascular health, the belief that only a lot counts. For years, 10,000 steps has loomed over people like an impossible daily verdict. Either you hit it or you failed. But that's not how biology works. The body doesn't wait for a perfect score before it begins to adapt. In fact, it often responds most powerfully when you move from near complete inactivity to just a little movement, not from moderate to extreme. Large-scale observational studies involving hundreds of thousands of people reveal something that should fundamentally change how we think about movement. Meaningful cardiovascular benefits begin appearing when daily step counts rise from roughly 2,000 to just 2,500 or 2,700 steps. That isn't a long walk. It might be a few extra trips around the house, a short loop after dinner, or simply parking slightly further away from the grocery store entrance. Yet to the cardiovascular system, that small shift represents a clear environmental change. Vessels are stimulated more regularly. The heart is no longer living in a passive, underused state. The baseline pressure dynamics that quietly accumulate in sedentary bodies begin to ease.
This is especially true for people who have been largely sedentary. The early gains are disproportionately large, meaning the first steps you add to your day carry more biological return than the steps added later. As daily movement increases further, benefits continue accumulating, but the curve flattens. Around 7,000 steps per day, the cardiovascular system appears to receive most of the adaptive signals it needs to remain flexible, efficient, and resilient. Beyond that, gains are real, but smaller relative to the additional effort. This isn't an argument for doing less. It's an argument for releasing the pressure of perfection, because people who feel less pressure are dramatically more likely to build sustainable habits, and sustainability is what actually produces lasting cardiovascular change.
There's another layer here that rarely gets discussed, and it matters deeply for people with irregular schedules, caregiving responsibilities, or demanding work lives. Benefits don't vanish if activity isn't perfectly daily. Evidence suggests that achieving higher step counts even on just 1 or 2 days per week still offers meaningful cardiovascular protection compared to doing nothing at all. The body doesn't track your calendar, it integrates signals over time. That means health is not reserved for people with ideal routines. It can be built in windows, weekends, occasional free afternoons, or days when energy finally allows. Each instance sends the same message to the system: remain capable, remain adaptable. But how you walk adds another dimension to this story, because pace, cadence, is not just a detail, it's a training signal in its own right. A moderately brisk pace doesn't transform walking into a battle. It doesn't push the heart into alarm zones or overwhelm the nervous system. What it does is create a gentle challenge space, a zone where the heart and blood vessels must coordinate more precisely than during a slow stroll, while remaining fully within comfortable control. And it's in that challenge space where something important happens. The cardiovascular system learns to meet increased demand without panic. From a mechanical standpoint, a faster walking cadence produces stronger, smoother blood flow. Vessel walls must expand more dynamically to accommodate that flow. The heart fine-tunes its rhythm and the strength of each contraction to maintain steady output. This isn't overexertion, it's intentional calibration. With repetition, the system develops what you might call a larger cardiovascular safety margin. Everyday demands that once triggered disproportionate responses, climbing stairs, carrying groceries, moving quickly through an airport, begin to feel unremarkable. The heart accelerates and decelerates more gracefully. Breathing steadies more quickly after exertion. The body stops treating ordinary physical life as an emergency. The real indicator of whether your pace is right isn't pain or breathlessness, it's sustainability. A pace that feels purposeful, slightly energizing, but still allows a short sentence or two of conversation is often the ideal adaptive zone. In that range, the cardiovascular system receives a meaningful learning signal, while the nervous system remains stable enough to support recovery and, crucially, to keep you wanting to come back tomorrow. Then there is a specific moment of the day that deserves its own chapter in this story, one that most people walk right past without realizing its significance: the 30 to 60 minutes immediately following a meal.
After eating, the body enters a complex state of energy processing. Blood glucose rises, insulin is released, blood flow is redirected toward the digestive system. In a metabolically flexible, well-adapted body, this transition happens smoothly. But in many people, particularly those with sedentary habits, metabolic dysfunction, or early-stage insulin resistance, the post-meal period becomes a quiet source of cardiovascular stress. Sharp, repeated glucose spikes don't just show up on a blood sugar monitor. They directly affect the endothelium, that same delicate inner vessel lining responsible for regulating dilation, constriction, and overall vascular responsiveness. Frequent glucose surges create a less favorable biological environment for vascular health, contributing to cumulative strain that adds up silently over years. A short walk after a meal intervenes in this process in a way that no pill fully replicates. No intensity required, no special technique needed. Simply moving after eating allows working muscles to draw glucose from the bloodstream through pathways that don't even require insulin, bypassing one of the key friction points in metabolic stress. The result is a measurable flattening of the post-meal glucose spike, which directly reduces the vascular strain that would otherwise follow. At the same time, circulation becomes gently activated throughout the body rather than remaining concentrated in one system. The endothelium receives its familiar signal, steady, moderate blood flow, and responds by maintaining vessel relaxation and responsiveness exactly when it's most needed. This effect isn't limited to people with diagnosed conditions. Even in healthy individuals, repeated daily glucose surges create cumulative biological wear. Post-meal walking doesn't erase modern eating habits, but it softens the metabolic edges enough to meaningfully reduce long-term cardiovascular risk. And perhaps most importantly, it requires no additional time carved out of a busy schedule. It simply uses a window that already exists. A few minutes of movement after a meal, or even just avoiding prolonged sitting, sends a message the body recognizes immediately. The system is supported, the transition is managed, the vessels are protected at their most vulnerable moment.
When these small interventions compound over years, what does the science actually show? Multiple large intervention studies and population analyses consistently find that regular walking is associated with durable reductions in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. The numbers often appear modest, a few millimeters of mercury, but their long-term cardiovascular significance is anything but small. Lower baseline pressure means less cumulative mechanical strain on vessel walls, less daily workload on the heart, a tangible, measurable reduction in the risk of heart disease, stroke, and cardiovascular events over decades of life. Resting heart rate trends lower in consistent walkers, not because the heart slows pathologically, but because each beat has learned to accomplish more. Greater stroke volume means the heart simply doesn't need to beat as often to sustain resting circulation. This efficiency is one of the clearest biological signatures of a cardiovascular system that has been trained for economy rather than constant urgency.
Beyond the numbers, perhaps the most meaningful long-term change is one that doesn't show up cleanly on any chart, but that cardiologists and patients describe consistently. The body's relationship with physical effort changes. Ordinary movements that once felt slightly taxing begin to feel routine. Heart rate rises less dramatically for the same exertion. Breathing returns to baseline more quickly after activity. Recovery from emotional stress improves alongside physical resilience. The cardiovascular system stops living on the edge of alarm and begins operating from a place of quiet confidence, flexible enough to meet demands, efficient enough not to be rattled by them. This is the deepest truth walking reveals when you follow it all the way to its conclusion. It doesn't just improve cardiovascular numbers, it re-educates how the heart and blood vessels respond to life itself. It teaches the system, through repetition, through rhythm, through consistency, that the world is manageable, that ordinary demands don't require emergency responses, that efficiency is more sustainable than force.
Humans were not designed for stillness followed by explosive effort. For the overwhelming majority of our evolutionary history, we moved frequently, at moderate intensity, as a natural feature of daily existence, not to train, but simply to live. The heart, the blood vessels, the nervous system, and the metabolic pathways that regulate all of it evolved in that environment. Steady movement, manageable demand, minimal prolonged alarm. Walking is the closest behavior modern life offers to that original template. It doesn't trigger survival responses. It doesn't push the system into battle. It sends the oldest, most familiar signal the cardiovascular system knows. The environment is safe, demand is reasonable, efficiency is the priority. No suffering required, no perfection demanded. Not 10,000 steps or nothing. Not pain as proof. Just small, correctly timed, repeatedly delivered signals, and a biology that has been waiting for your entire life to respond to exactly that. Because in the end, walking is not merely exercise. It is a daily conversation with your heart. And every single step is a sentence in that conversation, quietly telling the most important muscle in your body that the world and the life you're living in it is worth keeping up with.